Hi, welcome to Ben TV. My name is Eshwar Krishnasamy, and today's show is all about queer people of South Asia. Now, South Asia comprises of the countries Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bhutan,
Nepal,
Bangladesh,
Maldives,
and Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
South Asia has had a really long queer culture and history, as we know. Apart from loving cricket, curry, and the Commonwealth, we're here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the history of the queer culture of the South Asian diaspora. Today on the panel we have Aashvin and Gareth. Now, would you introduce yourselves?
My name's Gareth. I'm a gay male Indian Australian, born and raised in Sydney, moved to Melbourne 5 years ago. I do have some Portuguese and British ancestry as well. I was raised in the Catholic faith, but now identify as non-religious.
Hi, I'm Aashvin. I am Singaporean born but of Tamil descent. I moved to Australia when I was 16 in 2006. I have lived here ever since. I was raised a Hindu but consider myself a dabbler in spiritualism.
So I'm actually a 6th generation Malaysian Indian, and my great-grandparents migrated from India to Southeast Asia as spice traders, and I've been living here in Australia for the last 9 years. The conversation today is that, as we understand, there's a long, ancient, documented history of queer culture in the South Asian diaspora.
So growing up, I had quite a limited understanding growing up in a Catholic faith. So it's only in the last 5 years since I moved to Melbourne that I actually met queer people from South Asia, and even have befriended South Asian people. Growing up in Sydney, most of my friends were not of a South Asian background. So it's been interesting to kind of explore that side of me and to hear about their experiences and the history of queer culture in South Asia.
When you were growing up in Sydney, apart from your immediate family, you didn't really actually come into contact with a lot of queer South Asians. Is that
Definitely
what you're
not,
saying?
correct. Yes.
So, and you've found your identity, or you've been able to link yourself with that part of your identity since you moved to Melbourne?
Yes, definitely.
Interesting. What about you, Aashvin?
In terms of my understanding of queerness in my culture as an Indian person, if anyone bothered to investigate, they would see pre-colonial history. There are open representations that are accepted of, gods that descend from heaven and take the form of a woman to, fulfill the wishes of men, or scriptures, texts, art, music, theatre, all have queer representation in them, and that is to my level of understanding of what it means to be queer and a brown person.
So I would agree with Aashvin, even in terms of my perspective on that, because as I was growing up in a very conservative family, it was a little bit strange because on one side you felt the oppression, you felt unaccepted for your gender expression or your sexuality, but then on the other side I've got all these family members of mine who are worshipping trans deities and Hindu gods and goddesses that were shape-shifting, and sexuality was so fluid and it was so queer, colourful and camp, and what happened? At what point did all that change? So similar journey as well.
I think it's interesting that you used the word fluid, because I think before we were introduced these new laws and were taught how to govern our own people, we had this understanding that we were fluid and we weren't people that were defined by our genitals. We were so much more than just we had this understanding that this body is just an earthly affliction. It's not.
Absolutely.
You're so much more than just your physical self.
Absolutely. And there is a huge aspect of the culture that is often not talked about as well, where you don't attach shame to the body. Hence why in ancient, South Asian depiction of art, you see, no one's really covered up, or everyone's flaunting their bodies.
Celebrated.
And celebrated, exactly. Yes. So there was definitely one point in history in ancient South Asia, and I probably would reference India because I could relate to that because my ancestry is Indian, where if you look at ancient temple carvings of Khajuraho, for example, you know, there are depictions of men having sex with men, women having sex with women, orgies, everything. So at what point did all that change? At what point did we become conservative? So as these questions were coming up, and as I did more research and went deeper, I started looking at images, mythology, stories, because as we know, in the South Asian culture, there were many, many forms of how these stories were passed on, and they were mostly oral. This was before the written text came in, but a rich array of visual, performing arts, and literary works in ancient South Asia, where all these diverse sexualities or gender expressions were recorded and they were celebrated. So that led me to ask the question, why are we so oppressed now? Why are we not accepted? And as I dug further, I realized that colonization definitely had a big impact in the region in terms of how we viewed all that. And of course, laws were put into place, and after 300 years, we forgot that we once had a thriving queer culture in South Asia. And that was the debate that I used with my family to affirm my queerness regarding the recent decriminalization of homosexuality in India under Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. Now, what do you think of that, and how do you think that is going to impact us?
So my experience is, and my awareness of is that migrants often bring the values of the country that they left. So I recognise that it's in my own family, and I believe it's been written about in literature as well. And we saw it with the recent marriage equality postal survey. So I guess some visibility around the changes to Section 377 will just bring more attention to those issues that are often not talked about, because the generation that migrated from India, their communication would be limited to mostly just communication with relatives in South Asia. Whereas I guess our generation, we're a bit more attuned to seeing things on YouTube, and we're aware that within India, through cable television they have there, lots of different talk shows, that LGBT issues have been discussed in the media, and I guess that's raised the consciousness of people within South Asia, and I guess I'm referring to India in particular. And yeah, I think that'll, it's a good way to, I guess it's a way for Australians here to recognise that that India is evolving and changing, and yeah, it is the world's largest democracy. So it was great that that when attention was brought to the change in the penal code.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you, Gareth, because I probably can relate to you from that perspective as well. Because as you know, as a 6th generation Malaysian Indian, even within my family, people still have the mindset of what they left behind in India. So a lot of the views back then is still within the family, because you know, they want to keep the culture together, but unfortunately it also came with a lot of Victorian laws that was implemented in India back in the early 1900s, and that mindset is still there. And the fact that India has decriminalized homosexuality now is going to reopen that debate, and that's going to give queer people an opportunity to debate the issue with the family, because families need to know, because they've often used these laws to oppress us. I hope that after today's discussion that you've got a little bit more of a better understanding about the culture and the history of queer people of South Asia. Hope to see you next time. Thank you.